The Potomac River, flowing through the heart of the nation's capital, holds a unique and significant place in American history, particularly during the Civil War. Spanning 405 miles from the Allegheny Mountains in West Virginia to the Chesapeake Bay, the river served as both a vital military route and a symbolic divide between the Union and Confederate states. During the Civil War, the Potomac was not merely a geographical feature. It was a contested space that played a central role in shaping military strategy, logistics, and the political narrative of the time. From its use as a transportation route for troops and supplies to its role as a frontline boundary, the Potomac River became emblematic of the divisions that tore the country apart. At the start of the Civil War in 1861, the Potomac River was much more than a natural feature. It was a strategic dividing line between the Union and the Confederacy. Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, was located just north of the Potomac, while Virginia, a key Confederate state, lay to the south. The river thus became a central front in the war, separating the Union from the Confederacy and playing a critical role in both military and civilian life. The symbolic significance of the Potomac River was immediately evident. For the Union, Washington, D.C. was a center of government and power, and its safety was paramount. Control of the Potomac was vital, not just for military purposes, but for maintaining the psychological and political morale of the Union. For the Confederacy, Virginia represented a crucial base of operations and a natural stronghold. The Confederates were keenly aware of the river's importance, and securing key points along its banks became a priority in their efforts to defend the South. In the early stages of the war, the Potomac River saw minimal military engagement, but it remained a source of tension and strategic importance. The Union's early military campaigns focused on maintaining control of Washington, D.C., and preventing any Confederate advances into the North. One of the earliest and most significant confrontations took place with the Confederate attempt to seize control of the Potomac, and particularly the strategic area around the Potomac River Bridge near Alexandria, Virginia. The battle for control of key river crossings was critical. The Confederacy's first real attempt to challenge Union control of the river came shortly after the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861, which marked the beginning of the war. The Union quickly fortified Washington, D.C., building defenses that would ultimately become known as the Fortifications of Washington. At the same time, Union forces began occupying key points along the Potomac, including Alexandria, to safeguard the capital. By the summer of 1861, Union forces were constructing a chain of fortifications and artillery positions along the river to prevent any Confederate attack from crossing into Maryland and threatening Washington. Throughout the Civil War, the Potomac River became a critical transportation route for both Union and Confederate forces, though the Union ultimately retained control of the river and its surrounding waterways. For the Union Army, the river was used to transport supplies, troops, and artillery between the capital and the northern states. In particular, the Potomac River was the route by which General George McClellan's Army of the Potomac moved during the Peninsula Campaign and other significant operations in Virginia. The river also served as a route for naval operations. The Union's blockade of Confederate ports relied in part on controlling waterways like the Potomac to limit the flow of supplies to the Confederacy. On several occasions, naval skirmishes occurred on the river, particularly involving the Union Navy's patrols along the Potomac and Chesapeake Bay. The Union also used the Potomac to launch raids against Confederate supply lines and military positions in Virginia, sometimes deploying the famous ironclad ships like the USS Monitor to patrol the river. For the Confederacy, the Potomac was not easily controlled due to Union naval dominance. However, Confederate forces did attempt to disrupt Union operations by conducting raids along the riverbanks and by targeting Union supply lines. In the early years of the war, the Confederacy hoped to strike directly at Washington, D.C. via the Potomac, particularly by launching a series of attacks in 1861 to 1862, though these efforts were largely thwarted by the Union's fortified defenses and superior military presence on the river. One of the most notable battles fought on the Potomac River was the Battle of Ball's Bluff, which took place on October 21, 1861, in Loudoun County, Virginia, just across the river from Maryland. It was a small but significant engagement in the early part of the war, where Union forces were caught off guard while attempting to cross the river and mount a raid into Confederate-held territory. The battle resulted in a humiliating defeat for the Union, with the loss of over 1,000 men, including Colonel Edward D. Baker, a U.S. Senator from Oregon and close friend of President Abraham Lincoln. The battle also marked the first time that the Potomac River played a significant role in a military defeat for the Union. The aftermath of Ball's Bluff led to congressional investigations and the establishment of a congressional committee on the conduct of the war, which pressured the Union government to reevaluate its military strategies and leadership, ultimately leading to the replacement of General McClellan as commander of the Army of the Potomac. As the war progressed into its second and third years, the Potomac River continued to serve as a strategic resource for both sides. Despite Confederate attempts to infiltrate and disrupt Union control of the river, the Union Army maintained its position along the Potomac and strengthened its infrastructure. The river became a central feature of the Union's military strategy in the region, and its importance grew during key campaigns, such as the Battle of Antietam, 1862, and the subsequent battles in Northern Virginia. One of the most defining features of the Potomac River during the war was its role as a conduit for the movement of troops, particularly in the later stages of the war when General Ulysses S. Grant commanded the Union Army. The river was essential for logistical operations, as it allowed for the rapid movement of troops and supplies to support Grant's military campaigns in Virginia. This was particularly evident during the Siege of Petersburg and the eventual Union victory at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865. The Potomac River was more than just a strategic military asset. It also became a symbol of the larger conflict between North and South. For the Union, the river represented the defense of the nation's capital and the protection of American democracy. For the Confederacy, the river was a reminder of the divide between the two regions and the hope that they might one day cross it to reach the heart of the Union. In the years following the Civil War, the Potomac River continued to serve as a historical marker of the conflict, with many key sites along its banks becoming part of the American memory of the war. Landmarks such as Arlington National Cemetery, which sits on the Potomac River's banks, became sacred sites where the sacrifices of soldiers on both sides were honored. The Potomac River played a critical role in the Civil War, both as a physical boundary and as a strategic military asset. It was a lifeline for the Union Army, providing vital transportation and serving as a key line of defense for the capital. For the Confederacy, it was a contested space that represented both an opportunity for offensive action and a symbol of division. Throughout the war, the Potomac was a witness to key military events, from the Battle of Ball's Bluff to the Union's final push toward victory in Virginia. Today, the Potomac continues to hold a deep historical and symbolic significance, serving as a reminder of the fierce struggles fought along its shores and the lasting legacy of the Civil War. All right, that's all for today's video. I hope you found it interesting and learned something new. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow.